It doesn't matter. He tapes over my voice with what he wants anyhow.
That's true.
I think, didn't I? I identified myself on the first film.
Thibodeau over me here.
It's the reverse speech part of it that really gets me. Okay, guys.
You ready to go? And good day, I'm Ted Gunderson. I have a radio talk show out of the Amerinet Network, Tampa, Florida, 8 to 10 a.m. Pacific time, Monday through Friday. And last summer, the summer of 1997, I invited Chip Tatum to come on my show for a 2-hour interview. Well, ladies and gentlemen, that interview ended up 26 hours. And I had him back recently for another interview, another 20-some hour plus interview. This man is full of all kinds of information. And before I leave you and introduce you to Chip, let me just mention that my radio show can be heard on Galaxy One Transponder 17, 5.58 frequency wideband audio satellite. So today I have with me Chip Tatum. This man is unbelievable. 25 years, CIA Black Ops operator. Chip, welcome to a video which you and I are going to distribute. Tell the world about what went on behind the scenes in your Black Op operation.
Thanks, Ted. Great to be here. Great to be here.
Great to be here.
Great to be here.
Chip never could speak English too well. No, this guy's very intelligent and a good man, great American. I'm very proud to be a part of his, at least spreading the information out to help Chip any way that I can. And we have some books we're going to talk about later on, the Tatum Chronicles, and Nixon's Darkest Secret, I think is, yes, Nixon's Darkest Secret, which we will discuss. But before we go into the books, Chip, how did you become involved in working for the CIA? And I guess we have to go back to your Army training and Special Forces and so forth, right?
Sure. I flunked a chemistry exam in the early 70s and ended up being drafted, receiving my draft notice. In lieu of going into the Army or another service, I didn't really want to go to Vietnam. So I joined the Air Force. I was promised that I could be an air traffic controller under their Project Guarantee. They did make me an air traffic controller, but they made me a little bit different type of air traffic controller. They sent me to Army jump school and Special Forces training, and I became a combat controller. During my first tour in Vietnam, I was on a classified mission. Having completed the mission, we were captured. I spent time in captivity, and when I came out of captivity, we were debriefed by the CIA station chief out of Saigon, Bill Colby. From that time, in 1971 until 1992, I was one of the boys.
Okay, now Chip, you joined the Air Force so you could be a traffic controller, right? Air traffic controller. And you were told that you wouldn't have to worry about being in the front lines, right?
That's right. Even if I did go to Vietnam, I would be in an air-conditioned control tower hundreds of miles from the enemy.
And like so what other jokes do you have for us today, huh?
I'd still like to find that tech sergeant recruiter.
He probably went underground. If he knew as much about you as I do, he probably disappeared maybe even, huh? Okay, Chip, so you're over, you had like over 100 jumps behind the enemy lines?
Right.
And this was before you became involved in CIA operations or before?
During.
During. So after your capture, you were grabbed by the CIA and they liked, you know, what you'd done, of course. Now, what why were you captured and what led up to that? Was this Operation Red Rock?
This was Operation Red Rock.
Okay, then let's go back before that.
Okay.
And tell us about Operation Red Rock. When did you first have an inkling that you'd be involved in this operation?
Well,
excuse me, just a minute. Operation Red Rock is a code word, right?
That's a code name for the particular mission that we were on.
And they always have code names, right?
Or numbers. Sometimes they have numbers.
Right. Okay. So when did you first have an inkling that you were going to be involved in this operation?
I had just jumped in, parachuted into NKP Thailand, the base that I was TDY to, and when I landed on the pad, at the medevac pad at the hospital, a chopper was inbound, and when the chopper landed, a Special Forces captain and some other people got off. One of the patients, one of his men was on a stretcher. The captain went in, and the colonel who ran the base was there to meet me. It was an award ceremony. When they were going in, he said something to the colonel, and they all turned around and looked at me, and I knew I was in trouble then.
And what happened after that?
The following morning at 3 a.m. I was called into the colonel's office. And let me tell you, folks, I was a little airman, you know, just made buck sergeant, and I rarely had contact with a colonel in my life. One time, and that's for disciplinary purposes in Oklahoma City.
And how old were you then?
19 years old.
Just a kid?
Just a kid. So when they told me I was to report to the colonel, I knew I was dead. I'd done something
not
wrong.
yet.
I'd done something wrong, and I was gonna fixing to get it.
But Chip, had you had Special Forces training at that point?
Yeah, I had spent almost a year in Special Forces training across the United States, Sea Survival School, POW, jungle training, the works.
And what did the colonel say to you when you walked into his office?
He told me that I was there to join a mission, a team, a joint task force that's been put together for a classified mission, and he gave me the opportunity to talk and let him know how I felt about it. And he said, "How do you feel about this, Sergeant Tatum?" I said, "Well, you know, sir, I'm new in country. I really don't, other than schooling, don't have the experience of someone you need for this. I think you ought to get someone else." He said, "I didn't ask you what you think. I just gave you the opportunity to accept it before I told you you're going anyhow."
Okay, so you volunteered, in other words.
He volunteered me.
Yeah, right, okay. And what happened next? Did you go into training with these people then? With the other crew members?
Went and packed up my gear, was on the chopper out of there within an hour.
And where did you fly to, and when did you arrive there?
We flew about 20 kilometers outside of NKP to outside of a small village where we'd set up a training camp for Team Red Rock. The person that I was replacing was their commo man. He had, on a jump, had broken his leg. And I was jump qualified, I was Special Forces qualified, so I was his replacement.
And this was in Vietnam at the time?
Cambodia, or it was Thailand.
In Thailand, okay. Right. And tell us about your training.
It was a short 2-week training, really familiarity with one another, because we actually didn't get the mission parameters in until 3 days prior to the operation. We were primarily set in place and worked in the community, seeking out Viet Cong along the border of Laos, so that we could get some tactical training. We also were working and trying to develop tandem jump techniques, because part of the mission, and we didn't understand why we had to learn tandem jumping. That's parachuting with 2 people until the actual mission brief. But we were trying to work out tandem jump techniques, and we did it.
And how many people were in training with you at that point?
All 13, just the 13 team members. Then we brought in, for each team member, there was a North Vietnamese sapper that was brought in to train with us. They were our prisoners, prisoner of wars that we had captured in battle.
And these were the ones that were going to jump with you?
These were the ones that we weren't sure why we were jumping with them and working with them. All we knew is that these were the men that we were going to be doing something with at that point.
Did you know any of these other crew members before this?
No, like I say, I was the only member of the Air Force, and I'd just been in the Air Force for a year, so no one.
And did they know each other?
No. And normally that's done for compartmentalization, especially when you're talking about a highly classified mission. The worst thing you can have is a group of good old boys, and there's a reason for that, you know. In special operations, you can't have the influence of a friendship. It can clutter your mind and keep you from doing the mechanical operation that you were trained to do.
Because conceivably you could be asked to kill one of your fellow associates or fellow soldiers too, right?
They may
under
come
certain
to you,
circumstances.
They may come to you and tell you that he's a spy in the group and he needs to be taken out, and if you're his friend, you're going to be probably more apt not to do it than if you just didn't know him.
And did you know the last names of these individuals?
No. We all had code names. Mine, although they called me Bulldog in country, the actual code name I was given while I was there was Highway.
Why? Any particular reason for highway?
Our captain, team commander, would always explain to us it's my way or the highway, and he'd tell the team that. Well, I was willing to take the highway. I wanted to leave, especially after I saw the kind of things they did. Those guys were crazy.
For example?
So I took the highway. Well, at one point they were saying how high the helicopter could go and jump without a parachute without getting hurt, you know. Just for fun. I mean, this was an in-country activity, and they had a contest every year where they would take and they just jump out of the helicopter as it was exiting the AO.
Well, there were a few guys broke their legs on that one, weren't there?
You bet. That's how ready the guy I replaced broke his leg.
How high would they go, by the way?
Well, I went high, and I was dizzy for about 2 hours.
How high were you when you jumped?
I think it was about 35 or 40 feet.
Oh, you had to know how to roll then, didn't you?
Oh, roll. I didn't even know I thought I was stepping out of the aircraft onto the ground, but he'd taken off already. I thought he was just hovering, you know.
So much for surprises, huh?
Sure.
Okay, so you saw these crazy guys training, and you said, hey, you know, I wish I'd taken that assignment back 100 miles behind the enemy lines in the at the airport as air traffic controller. It didn't work out too well. So what happened after that, Chip?
We were called back into Task Force Alpha. That was the intelligence entity. That's where all of the intelligence was gathered for the South Vietnam area of operations, and integrated and then passed out. So anything that comes out of Task Force Alpha has to be the correct information. Everyone accepts that as being authentic and on target for our intelligence. We were called back to Task Force Alpha. We met for our actual mission briefing. When we went to sit, the colonel called the room to attention, and in walked a general and a couple civilians. We'd already been told that there are a lot of suits around, and that just means CIA in the area. A lot of activity, suit activity, so we knew something was up. The man who actually briefed us, we nicknamed Mr. Peepers because he looked like the Mr. Peepers from the screen.
Bill Colby.
Name was Bill Colby.
And he was station chief there for the CIA in Southeast Asia?
And actually, the CIA does not operate in a arena, was not allowed to operate in that arena as the CIA, so his actual designation was Ambassador Colby, attached through the embassy in Saigon. You know, political officers are political officers, and that's how they get away with that. Yeah.
So this was the night before you jumped on your mission?
It ended up being 3 days before we jumped because we had some weather delays on the mission. The other man that was with him, the general from Washington, was General Haig.
Alexander Haig.
That's correct.
I know him well. As a matter of fact, I interviewed him in the White House on occasion when I was with the FBI. That's another story. I'll tell you that one someday, folks. I never have revealed that to anybody about my interview with General Haig. And then I saw him years later at a banquet, State Department banquet, and I walked up to him. By the way, I read him his rights when I went in the White House. I said, you have a right to remain silent, you have a right to an attorney. And I met him at a banquet years later, State Department, and I walked up, he gave the speech. It was, you know, a social affair. And I introduced myself. Oh, he says, I remember you. Says, are you going to read me my rights today?
He's pretty bulletproof.
Yeah, he is. Go ahead with Alexander Haig. So Alexander Haig and Mr. Peepers are there, Bill Colby, who later became director of the CIA.
Right.
And what did they tell you?
They explained to us that the reason General Haig was there is that he was the assistant to our national security advisor, Henry Kissinger. Kissinger worked directly for the president, and the president had decided that it was in the best interest of the country and of the war to see to the end of the war as quickly as possible, and Operation Red Rock was one of those key elements to that. They needed to get the foreign nations, Laos, Thailand, Cambodia, more involved on the offensive level rather than in a defensive posture in the war, so that we could start extracting troops out and leave the arena. What we needed to do was jump into what they had planned for us to do was jump into one of our allies' countries, dressed as North Vietnamese sappers. That's why we were working with these other sappers.
A sapper is what, a prisoner of war?
No, a sapper is a Vietnamese communist soldier.
Okay. Right.
Tunnel diggers, you know, we've all heard about
Okay,
the tunnels over
right.
there. Guerrillas, I mean,
Okay.
a true guerrilla, very well trained. So these sappers are who we were actually going in with to Phnom Penh Airport in Cambodia. The reason it was decided to do this was Lon Nol, the CIA-placed premier of Cambodia at the time, was still fence setting. He just wouldn't get in a heavy offensive posture against the Chinese-led armies of North Vietnam. He was sitting on the fence, so we decided if we went in as North Vietnamese sappers and totally destroyed the assets on the airport, which were primarily supplied by the United States anyhow. They were our aircraft that we'd given him. There were some French aircraft on the tarmac, but not many. If we would totally destroy those assets, it would make him realize that the North Vietnamese communists were actually coming in after his country now. And he'd get off the fence and ask us for help. Boy, it worked too.
Well, you said we decided, you meaning people in Washington, D.C. decided. Nixon himself.
This was actually Dr. Kissinger's plan.
So Dr. Kissinger came up with this idea. Nixon approved it.
He approved it with the statement after thorough thought that, and this was debriefed to me by Mr. Colby, that no one can ever know. No one can ever know what we've done to our allies. Otherwise, we wouldn't be trusted anywhere in the world.
And was that the case?
That was the case. No one could ever know what we had done. And when we were debriefed with a 25-year classification period.
Well, you were debriefed years later?
I was debriefed when I came out of the coma in the hospital in 1971.
Okay. Now this is what year now again? Going back to the
1971.
When you made the drop and you were debriefed. That's
January of '71, and then I was debriefed in June of '71.
Okay. Okay. So you made the drop with the sappers, right?
Made the drop. It was a night jump out of a C-130. Night drop in. Just south of town. We made our way into Phnom Penh. We rendezvoused with our transportation. Our transportation was provided by Montagnards.
Mountain men?
Mountain men from Vietnam, special forces trained. Very good fighters, but the thing about Montagnards is if they saw that the platoon that they were working with, and the special forces platoons, or the recon groups they were working with, if they saw that they were going to lose, all of a sudden those guys disappeared into the forest. They weren't going to lose with them.
Right.
And they could negotiate those jungles like it was nothing.
Now you were 13 men. Did you have 13 sappers?
No, unfortunately we lost one sapper, and Snake just didn't get along with him. Neither did Pablo, but...
Snake is code words for two of the guys in your crew.
Snake and Pablo, yeah. They didn't get along with him. So we didn't go in with a full contingency of sappers. When we did jump in, the sappers had figured out that they weren't going in. We had told them, our interpreter told them that we were actually jumping in to turn them over and trade them for American prisoners, and they were in a release program. Well, they didn't believe that. So they had their own contingency plan set up, and when we were, when we jumped in, they simply, because they were hanging below us and in front of us for the jump, they simply tucked, caused us to fall and roll, and tried to take us out. When we
and how many sappers were there? 12 then? 12 and 13. And
when it was all said and done, there was 8.
8 sappers?
8 sappers we left there.
Few
of them tried to escape and die as we traversed trying to get to our target.
So 5 of them
in total.
No, 8. You had 4 of them then.
Yeah, 4 of them with us. 4 of them died.
4 of them died right after you jumped.
Right.
Because they tried to overtake you. Now, what did you do with the others that were there that did survive?
Well, we had to leave some evidence of who was providing the operation. We had to leave them on the airport. So we released them on the airport and gave them a fair chance to go, and then shot them.
And in the meantime, did you commit your act of sabotage at the airport after that or before that?
We had several different entry points into the airport. We came in the north side by the munitions dump. You know, when we talk about coming in the north side, we didn't realize that there were mines in this called a dead zone. And it was completely mined between the 2 fences, and we weren't briefed on that. So we immediately knew something was up, and we weren't we know now that we weren't to return and we were to be left there.
Well, if you came in and you went through the minefield, you survived going in, right?
I didn't go through the minefield. I came in the front door of the airport with the team.
Okay. The ones that came in through the minefield, did they survive?
Yes, the sapper didn't.
Oh, I see. They sent a zapper out ahead of them?
The sapper, when they figured out they were in a minefield, they let him go ahead to clear the mines.
Okay. So you committed your act of sabotage.
Yes.
And what about ground forces at the airport, the other side?
Well, it was a staged arena. The ground forces had been pulled away. There was minimum security, just a skeleton crew there. We ran across the skeleton crew of palace guards that had been there, confronted them, and had to take them out.
And so was your act of sabotage quite all-inclusive, or was it just kind of a hit-and-miss situation just to let them know that so-called the North Vietnamese have been in there?
No, it was fairly inclusive. We even had air support from pilots, whether flying North Vietnamese aircraft. They dropped some rounds on the airport so that we could ensure that the devastation was good enough to warrant Lon Nole's participation with us.
And you've completed your mission. The sappers were eliminated. You left. How many survived coming out of there? There were 13.
Every one of us.
Every one of you survived.
Every one of us walked out of that encampment.
Weren't they worried about one of you going and being identified as an Anglo at the airport, even though you're dressed in North Vietnamese uniforms?
And there was a contingency for that. We had what's called slap packs. It's a napalm-filled container that we could pour the napalm on the body and pop a magnesium grenade, whiskey peat, and burn their body right there. So
they're not recognizable then.
Sure. Yeah.
Okay, you got out, and what happened after that? How'd you get out of there?
The Montagnards, who were tasked with the transportation, we had a rendezvous point. We met, we exited the area of operation and started heading north out of town. We knew it was 15 to 25 miles to the northeast of town was our rendezvous point where we were to be picked up. But that, it's not like the interstates we have here. These are little roads. We had a first indication that something was wrong because our platoon sergeant, Pop, saw that we were going in a little bit of the wrong direction, and we never really turned to the northeast. And then the timing was off. All of a sudden they stopped, and it wasn't long enough to have gone 15 clicks or 20 clicks outside of town.
So 15 kilometers, you went maybe, what, 5, 10?
Maybe about 10 after we left the limits of town.
Right, right.
About
so
10
you stopped, and what happened then?
Well, we were in a large vegetable truck with canvas sides. It stopped, and the Montagnards got out, but all of a sudden we heard receivers click. They were loading their weapons. So Pop and my way, our team commander, moved around to the back of the truck. They each took out a grenade on each side and tossed the grenade up back toward the front of the truck on the ground. They didn't pull the pins, they just took the grenades out. When you're a person and you see a grenade fall, you jump, you dive, you try to get out of there, and that's what the Montagnards did. When after they'd thrown the grenades out, they immediately jumped out and took control, overcame the guards. The interrogation started, and it didn't last long. They asked the first one the question. When he wouldn't answer, they shot him. They asked the second one the question, and he answered anything we wanted to know.
And then you shot him afterwards?
No.
You didn't? Okay, so I won't go into that. Okay, now, did you find any situation there, any contingency situation in looking around? I mean,
well, as we looked
why
around,
did they stop at that particular location?
As we looked around, we went out into the field, and we found that there was a large hole that had been put in the ground, and that was going to be where they were. He told us. We didn't have to look around. He told us that their job was, they were briefed that they were to kill us, and they were to drop us in a hole, and they showed us, this one showed us where the hole was. We actually used that as a command post area to call in aircraft for support, move the pickup zone from where it was to this new pickup zone. We spent some time through the day and into the evening waiting to be picked up. It was quite comprehensive what we had to go through, just to communicate out of the country and get an aircraft to come into a place that we weren't. You know, we contacted Moonbeam, which was our airborne command post in the area of operations on HF frequencies, high frequencies, and tried to get them to come in, and you know, the pilot said, well, you can't be there because we aren't there, you know, in Cambodia. And that has only recently, I guess in the past, what, 10 years or so, come out that, yeah, we really were in there. We really were operating in Cambodia. We really were operating in Laos. And these were classified arenas.
So did you have an alternative plan in case something went wrong, that you would be picked up at a certain location there then?
The plan that we had, My Way had thought early on, you know, things just, he'd been through a lot of these missions as a team commander. He and Pop had decided, well, things really don't seem as they are here. There's something wrong. And I guess anytime they knew that anytime you were working with suits, you better cover your tail, because they're not going to look out for your best interest. You have to look out for your own best interest. So they did leave contingency plans back at the base with trusted persons to try and pick us up. One of them being a friend of mine who was a chopper pilot. Another being a command post non-commissioned officer in charge of the command post. So, you know, contingency plans were there. However, you had to get messages to them to get those contingency plans in place, and that's what we were trying to do.
Now, did you expect the airplanes to come in and pick you up at that point?
Yeah, after we talked to them, we finally got clearance for them to come in. One aircraft even came in and circled the LZ ahead of time, making sure the area was clear for the chopper to come in. Then the chopper came in, but from what I was briefed by Mr. Colby, as the chopper was coming in, the colonel who was involved with the operation from Task Force Alpha had caught on that we had a contingency and we were being extracted out of the area. He didn't want it to happen. He was promised a star if we didn't come back.
Now, you're telling me you had your own contingency without the colonel knowing about it, and he found out about it?
You bet. He found out about it.
You are clever, aren't you?
Not me. My Way and Pop, Ted.
My Way and Pop.
My Way and Pop. They were wonderful teachers.
They could see ahead.
And Pop has severe brain damage today from that.
You still alive?
Still alive, yes.
And so Chip, you have this one location you're supposed to be picked up. Were you smart enough not to go and wait there?
The original location or
the original?
No, we never went there.
Okay.
There's no way.
You went to the new one.
After that aircraft came in, when the chopper was inbound to us, we had decided that, well, here comes our aircraft, but they were contacted over radio. It was a rescue aircraft, a King aircraft coming in. They were contacted that there were actually sappers had taken over Team Red Rock. And remember, we were dressed as sappers. We didn't have any U.S. uniforms. If we had been caught in country, we'd been prosecuted as spies because that's against all international law. So here we were, dressed in sappers in a foreign country, talking to these aircraft. I was controlling them down. As a combat controller, that's my job, bringing them into the LZ because it was a very small area. Bringing them in, knowing that we were going to leave. I mean, my heart was pumping. The adrenaline was flowing. I was tired. I was hungry. But man, we're getting out of here. And all of a sudden, the door guns on the Jolly let loose. I was when I was debriefed by Bill Colby. He said the colonel had called them and said that Team Red Rock had been overcome. It's actually sappers, and protect yourselves. And they saw sappers. Remember, this is the man who runs the intelligence entity for Southeast Asia telling him this. So they fired.
And how many did you lose there?
2.
And how did what? I mean, they didn't come in and clean. So you're down to 11 now.
Down to 11. They actually had called in. We lost 2 men, and but we had to return fire on the aircraft, shooting out the rear of the aircraft rather than shooting at the pilots because we didn't want to hurt our own guys. You know,
Did the plane go down?
No. We shot. Look, from the smoke and everything, it looked like maybe some hydraulics were shot out on it or something. We weren't sure. At any rate, they left the area, but they called in some air support to drop on that LZ.
Bombs?
Drop napalms on it. So we got out of the area quick, and as we were exiting, the sky lit up in the LZ.
But until you got out, you'd lost 2 men. Then you had to leave them behind.
Had to leave them behind, using the slap packs so that they'd never be identified.
Right. Okay. So there's 11 out.
Mm-hmm.
What did you decide to do then?
Well, we decided we would be best to try to make it across country ourselves. trust no one. And that's the way these guys operated. You know, we had some of the best on that team. I was just a kid. I was a victim of circumstances in there, and I mean, I had never engaged the enemy before I had gotten on Team Red Rock. But I engaged the enemy almost hourly after I was with Team Red Rock. We traversed across the country going toward South Vietnam, toward the Cambodia-Vietnamese border.
You're still in Cambodia.
Still in Cambodia, trying to make it to the border. And you have to understand, Cambodia was a refuge for the North Vietnamese. They could come into South Vietnam, they could attack, and then they could pull back across that border. And we weren't allowed to come across that border into Cambodia to attack them, to take them out. So they could resupply, they could rest, recuperate, R&R, whatever, and then come back in. It was a very difficult position.
And that's why Nixon wanted to deneutralize them, right?
Sure.
So you could go after them in Cambodia.
Well,
and maybe the
and so the
Cambodian
Cambodians
countries,
would,
yeah,
sure.
could go after them too, right?
Yeah.
Okay, so how many kilometers or how many miles did you have to go to get to the border?
Well, we didn't have maps. We had no idea. We know that, well, it was from Phnom Penh all the way to the border. That's 200 miles. It took. We were out for weeks, trying to work our way through the jungles. We'd come across some teams, routine patrols, and we'd either evade them or we'd engage them. One of the two.
No, how about eating? How about food?
Food was pretty easy to get. You know, as a survival, we'd come across villages too, and we get food from the villages. But
You must have shocked the heck out of the villagers then, huh?
no, we were still dressed as
Oh,
sappers.
I see, yeah. But I mean, you know, you're a white man, right?
Well, you know, we were
Did you have
thin.
slanted eyes?
We were thin, and we did have team members who, the one called the Kid was CIA, and he was Vietnamese. So you know, it wasn't that we didn't go into the villages ourselves. We'd stay back in the shadows of the forest area, and the Kid would go in and talk to him and get the food. And so you know, it wasn't.
Did he survive, the Kid?
No, the Kid did not survive.
Okay, but okay, so you made your way across some maybe 200 miles, and how close were you?
To within 4 miles of the border.
Oh, you're kidding.
And then we saw some F-4s circling the area. Looked like they were trying to get into an area, but there was a AAA artillery site, anti-aircraft artillery, firing on the F-4s, and you know we still had some munitions left that we could take them out with, some C4 packs. So we decided, hey, you know, we'll just take this out, and that was probably our greatest mistake. We didn't realize that we were in the middle of almost a battalion-size contingency of North Vietnamese.
Battalion size being how many troops?
I have no idea. I know that as we counted troops and as we passed encampments, easily over 2,000.
And here's 11 men trying to survive 4 miles from the border, and you decided to take this anti-aircraft.
Blew it to hell and back too.
I guess you did, but that was a mistake because that brought a lot of undue and unnecessary pressure on you, and obviously they started looking around for, hey, where'd this come from, right?
Yeah, and as we'd walk across paddies, the patrols would be coming one way, and you know we dressed as sappers, you know, didn't have U.S. Munitions with us. All of our munitions were Chinese. AKs and so forth. So we would be traversing one side of the paddy while this other team would come across, and Kid would be there and salute them, you know, and hail them, and we just keep walking, you know. But however, one time we came right up to the forest area and we came face to face, and here's this kind of face looking directly into a North Vietnamese lieutenant, and we were in trouble.
Obviously. Did you go into combat then, or did you try to?
Went right into combat then.
Oops, let me see. Where's that AK? Whatever. Huh?
No, they didn't have enough bullets in those for me. My way used to tell me, you know, I was a white knuckle firer because I'd hold that trigger down and melt that barrel. The clips just weren't big enough for me.
So you had hand to hand at that point?
I had hand to hand. I'd melted barrels. We actually ran out of ammunition. We had to overtake other patrols to restock ourselves. I mean, these guys were good. They were the best, Ted. They were true American heroes, doing their job as best they could.
Don't you think there's someday, Chip, that we can honor these men, but there's no way of knowing their last names, is there?
Well, you know, Pop knows a couple of them, and I think that someday he may be willing to do that. He does have severe neurological problems. He's able to talk. He knows me. He remembers what went on, but it's affected his motor motor movements, and he's not willing to do anything he thinks that will endanger his family.
Can't blame him for that.
Not at all, no.
And he's still alive, and where is he? What state is he in?
Oklahoma.
Oklahoma. Good old Okie, huh?
Mm-hmm.
So what happens? You were captured?
We were captured. We spent 92 days in captivity, being moved from point to point in camps. We were actually interrogated by Chinese and Soviet officers. It was never Vietnamese officers. The Vietnamese were there, Vietnamese soldiers in the encampments, because it was theirs, but the actual linguists and interrogators and those who performed the torture were Chinese and Soviet.
How many do you have there now in your team?
I believe 10, maybe 9 ended up in captivity.
So you lost 2 along the way.
Mm-hmm.
And where did they incarcerate you?
They started moving us in the jungles along the border area, not knowing that we were only 4 kilometers from the border. We just know we were being moved. We were incarcerated in one small encampment, then we were moved to a larger encampment, and this had been used in the past, you could tell, because they had cages set up in a semicircular area, and they had 3 posts set up, and they took 2 of us immediately. They stripped us of our clothing, broke this foot, my right foot, so that we couldn't try to escape.
They break everybody's foot?
Broke everyone's. Well, they didn't break. One of the guys was already unconscious, and they didn't break his foot, but they broke all of our feet, 1 foot anyhow. Stripped us of our clothing and put us in these cages. Two of our guys they put on the posts, and we thought that they would be tortured right away, but they weren't. They put them on those posts so that we could watch them as they suffered up there. They weren't given food. They weren't given water. The rest of us were given some water and some food on occasion.
And when you say put them on the post, they tied them to a post out there where you could see them from your cages. Mm-hmm. And who interrogated you? Say a Russian and a Chinese officer?
The Soviet officer seemed to be in charge of this particular camp, and the Chinese officer his cohort was actually the man who administered the torture. Once that started.
Do you want to go into the torture at all, or would you prefer not to? Yeah, I thought so. How about how many men were tortured? Were you all tortured?
We were all tortured, and when it was all said and done, there were 3 of us alive. When we were finally released, I shouldn't even say released.
You were rescued, actually.
We were rescued by a Marine Recon Patrol, and boy, I'll tell you, I love those guys.
I guess you do.
All you Marine Recons out there, aces up, buddies. That's the only reason I'm alive today.
Well, so there are 3 of us survived. So 13 came out of the Cambodian airport. You lost 2 from friendly skies, mm-hmm. friendly fire. And then across the jungle, you lost 2 more, mm-hmm. And now you're down to what, 8?
Had 8, and we ended up losing the Montagnard that was with us, that we'd pulled with us. he was ready to start squealing and tell who we were, so we decided loose lips sink ships from the old briefing days, so they just took him out. We took him out ourselves.
Okay, this is before you were captured then?
No, after we were captured.
Oh, did you? Okay, okay.
We were bringing him back to put in front of that colonel before these guys did to that colonel what they intended to do to him.
Okay. So can I mention the colonel that you had a medal on his, a religious medal on his?
Our captain.
A captain had a religious medal on his, around his neck.
Had a St. Christopher medal. I think that's
right.
I'm not sure, the medal of travel
Catholic,
or something
yes.
like that.
And they, just if I can mention this, just one thing, one of the tortures that they did was skin him alive, right?
Skinned him alive. Right.
In front of the rest of you.
Put him in a configuration like a cross as a Christian, and skinned him alive in front of us. Held knives and bayonets to our temples. Required us to watch it. If we closed our eyes or tried to turn our heads, they'd start pushing in.
God have mercy on his soul. Tragic. Then, so you're rescued. Mm-hmm. And there was a fight there at the camp between the Marines.
The Marines didn't know we were in the encampment. They came in. They were mapping the area for Lam Son 719 was the mission number. They were just simply in there mapping the area, and they were told if they came across any prisoner of wars, do what you need to extract him. So they were actually found out by the guards, and a firefight ensued. Our guys won, and 3 of us were left alive after that. However, one of our guys from a Chinese officer had a stomach wound. That was pretty unfortunate. He was a good Kansas kid, you know. He had a stomach wound, and I was told when we were debriefed that he later died from that wound. We had gotten out of the cages and started running for the jungle, and I recall seeing one of the young Marines go down on a knee, level down on me, and I was running. My weight was on my right leg, and he shot a ricochet. It wasn't a full force bullet. A ricochet hit me in the leg, bent my leg backwards. I tumbled, and I'm also told that a grenade went off, and it hit me in the back of the head across here. Pretty good scar back there right now that rendered me unconscious and caused a lot of swelling on the brain. So I was air evac'd from Saigon. I was air evac'd into Clark Air Force Base in the Philippines.
Well, did the Marines, if he was firing at you, didn't realize you were an American?
They didn't realize we were there. They didn't know we were there.
And at what point were the Marines aware that they had some POWs on their hands?
Our team member that was shot in the stomach started yelling in English to them, and so they realized that there were some in there.
Good, okay.
So he saved our lives.
And so you came out, and you went over to Clark Air Force Base after that.
Right. And that when I finally came to later, within 3 days, that man from Saigon, Bill Colby, was there to debrief me. And at that point, he told me that I have 2 choices. I can work directly for the CIA, or I can stay with the military, which I've had such great experiences with at that point, and work under the operational control of the CIA. Well, you know, honestly, I figured, hey, you know, I've got this tour in Vietnam. I can stay in the States now. I never have to come back. I said, okay, I'll stay in the military, because with the CIA, I know I could go anywhere, you know. But I had a government commitment still, so I said, I'll stay with the Air Force. You guys can control my assignments. Little did I know that I'd spend more years back in that arena, working later for a company called Air America.
In the debriefing session, if you can tell us this, were you informed of the fact that as to who put the orders out that none of you should return, none of you should come back alive?
He told me that it was Nixon gave the order that no one can survive. And Bill said that when he got that order in, Haig and Kissinger disagreed with it, but the orders came from the commander-in-chief himself. So he had to plan the contingency as such. He said, but Sergeant Tatum, I planned it so that I knew you guys could overcome this obstacle.
The 2 mountain men.
That's right.
But
we just didn't have a contingency for the rest of it. Nothing you can do. When you have a United States Army colonel and United States Air Force colonel both become traitors to their country.
Where are these colonels today?
I don't know.
Okay. So much for that question.
That's the safe answer.
I wouldn't put money on that one. Okay. Anyway, so be it. Let's leave that as is. You come back, you go to work for the Air Force on a contingency plan to also work with the CIA, right?
Operational control. All my orders at that point would be controlled by the Central Intelligence Agency. They would work through... actually, the position that they used to work to gain movements, as I would receive orders and see who signed the orders, was a person who would be seated as the Deputy Director of Intelligence to the Joint Chiefs of Staff. And most of the orders that I have, you'll see, I have, they may be in there, one of them may be in there. You'll see that this person is the person who would sign those orders through the years and actually move me from one place to another. At one point, that man's name was Colin Powell.
So what was Colin Powell's rank at that time?
I think he was a 2-star general at that time. That position was a 2-star position.
So in essence, you actually went to work for the CIA, even though you were in the military.
Even though I was
status.
In the military, and pretty illegal. You know, you can't. We couldn't draw checks from 2 entities, double dip. But our operational efforts were all controlled by the CIA.
And what were your assignments after that? You came back, you recovered, you gained your health back. When you were being taken care of physically and regaining your health, was Pop with you, your friend from Oklahoma?
No, he had been sent straight back to the States. His head wounds, he received head wounds also. They were so severe that he had to go straight back to the trauma and care center.
So that was the end of your relationship or association with Pop?
Until later years, yeah.
Until later years, okay. Right. You've been in touch with him since then, okay. But right now you're going to work, you're still in the Air Force, you're going to work for the CIA. What were your assignments?
One of the assignments, to give you an example, I was moved all over the place. I was sent down working, because it was such an intense mission and there was a lot of knowledge on my part. The orders were they wanted to hold me close to the White House, so I was actually...
Weren't they afraid you were going to talk?
Well, that's what they wanted to ensure, you know. If they just gave me open movement, it's one thing, but they kept me under very tight reins. I worked at Key Biscayne at Homestead Air Force Base in the White House down there. I was in charge of the receiver site for Air Force One when they would come in. In addition,
was Nixon the president then?
Nixon was the president then.
Weren't you a little nervous over that?
As a matter of fact, myself and my NCOIC were going out to the control tower to bring in Air Force One at one point, and he had made a mention to the Secret Service as they were checking badges of personnel going in, saying, he said, what are you doing in the area? And the Master Sergeant said, oh, we're here to see the crook. We found ourselves face down by the Secret Service, and then when they got our credentials, they said, what are you guys doing talking like that? So
little did they know, huh?
Well, he was just joking, you know.
Yeah. Little did they know that Nixon Nixon had given the order that you were not to return from an assignment in
I never
Cambodia.
told him that, you know.
Right.
I'd never told my NCOIC. I kept my lips closed and zipped for all 25 years, and in 1996, that was the end of the 25-year classification period, and I started my book then.
But before we go up to 1996, Chip, you had some assignments involving drugs and drug running by the CIA, right?
Well, and yeah,
you're not reluctant to talk about that, are you?
No, in two different arenas. In in the Vietnamese conflict, there was some involvement simply because the Air America pilots, you know, sometimes would carry drugs, sometimes they'd carry wheat, sometimes they'd carry rice, sometimes they'd carry weapons, you know. It was various cargoes that they'd carry. And my job when an aircraft went down, primarily because they were carrying crypto gear, communications gear that was secret and had codes on it that couldn't be gotten by the enemy. I would have to jump in, I'd retrieve this crypto gear, and many times retrieve the precious cargoes that was on board, heroin sometimes, and see that it was extracted.
Air America being a CIA air operation.
CIA air operation. Yeah.
So you had that in Vietnam, and then you came back and you went to work, you were involved in...
Actually, when Nixon went to Peking, I was involved in that.
Okay, tell us about that.
I was sent ahead of him into a place called Guam. I controlled the aircraft across, and then I was moved over closer. And
what year are we now?
That was, I think, 72.
Okay.
Maybe 72.
So you went to Guam. You were to control the air traffic.
Controlled the Air Force One across, and then we were also one of the primary communication stations. I was moved to a place that we use today even as a primary commo spot, and I can't give that place away, but it's very close to China, to the Chinese border. Then we were moved there to maintain contact in case there was an emergency, so we could put fighters in.
And but that was it. I mean, basically you were just guiding the plane. I mean, keeping the lanes open so no other aircraft would be in that air lane, right?
We'd keep aircraft 25 miles from Air Force One. We'd have two fighter aircraft in front of Air Force One, two fighters to the rear, and have rescue aircraft up in different locations along the way.
And okay, there's nothing unusual about him going to Peking, though, was there?
No, nothing at all.
Okay.
Other than he's the first president, you know,
to go to China.
Right, and now going along with him with open access was Dr. Kissinger. So.
Right. Okay, let's go back to your CIA activity in South America, in Central America?
In 1978, I actually left service of the government. Bill Colby had, being my handler, had moved on in the early 70s to Washington to take a position, and ultimately became the director of the CIA. He maintained, because of the sensitivity of what I knew from that mission, he maintained direct control over me. And when he passed the baton on to the new director of the CIA, that new director called me back out of the field. I was in Yugoslavia at the time. Colby debriefed me, and Mr. Bush rebriefed me. And he was explained during the briefing and debriefing that I was loyal, I was a good man, and anything he needed, I was a trusted entity, and he could count on me. I had no problems with that.
Bush was head of the CIA at that time, and he personally debriefed you?
He personally in-briefed me as his personal...
In-briefed me, yeah, right. Mm-hmm.
As one of his personal assets.
Right.
So that was my first contact with the man who would someday become president. Bill had become a good friend, Colby, through the years, and worked with me, trained me, taught me the ropes, and he told me, he said, Chip, you do have some enemies in Washington. You know that Haig and Kissinger are very powerful men. Nixon's a very powerful man. You need to be sure that maybe you need to leave government service. You don't have me up here to protect you any longer. So I did. In '78 I left. I relocated to Colorado, started my family, got married, relocated to Colorado, started a little sandwich shop, and I was in the sandwich shop one day, and in walked these two guys with sunglasses and...
Suits again.
God, those suits.
Okay, you're jumping ahead now. I want to go back out to Central South America. Are you avoiding that, or?
No, we haven't gotten to that.
Oh, you haven't?
That
really?
was in 1980 when I was reactivated.
Oh, in 1980 you were reactivated.
Right.
Okay, so you go to Colorado, and all of a sudden two guys with suits walk in with sunglasses, and what do they say to you?
They say, Bulldog, and I just thought, oh, no. And I didn't answer. Then they said, Pegasus, and that was the code name that I was given. So I knew, I didn't know who they were at first, but when they used Pegasus, I knew I was toast.
Right. Pegasus was a code word used for your operation?
Right.
You personally?
That was my code name.
Okay.
So I was told that my new assignment was to go to a place called Fort Campbell, Kentucky.
But you were out of the service then?
As a reserve officer, you're never really,
No, you were in the reserve?
In the reserves, right.
Okay.
I was reactivated. I was sent to a place called Fort Campbell, Kentucky. They decided after the problem in the desert, trying to get the hostages held in Iran, where our aircraft all went into one another, that they needed a task force set up for anti-terrorism. So they decided they'd put together an aviation task force at Fort Campbell, Kentucky. They took CIA assets, CIA officers, they put them under the control of the National Security Council, and they built this new unit called 160th Aviation Company that really wasn't on any of the military TO&E equipment lists. So there we were.
Another covert operation.
Another covert operation building itself in Fort Campbell, Kentucky. During the time from 1980 through 1984 that we were building that unit, testing different techniques of flight, testing different flight platforms. A lot of them I can't talk about. We get into some heavy losses because we were doing things that never were done with these helicopters and other aircraft that we were flying. And so on one particular occasion, we lost one of our unit commanders, a major, flew into some high power lines during a nighttime exercise. He was killed. His co-pilot, a warrant officer, had his legs cut off. During the post-crash investigation, a man from Washington came in and he identified himself as Jake. He was accompanied by another man who wouldn't identify himself, and so we just nicknamed him the Snake.
Jake the Snake.
Jake and the Snake. That's who was there. He was a pretty slimy guy, We would later find that Jake was a person who was attached to the NSC, and his actual name was Oliver North.
And that's your first contact with Ollie North?
That was my first contact with Ollie North.
And so what happened after that?
We had, the United States government had pushed for a little rebellion down in Central America, a place called Nicaragua. They had pushed and helped organize a group of rebels called the Contras. They talked them into fighting against the Sandinistas. I don't know why. I have some ideas why, but I won't get into just my ideas because I don't know why, other than someone thinking that it's a terrible thing that a country have its own sovereignty and not do like we are. Have this.
And not be ruled by the CIA.
Right, right. At any rate, the CIA promised that they would fund and they would back this rebellion, but a man named Boland came out with an act in Congress that after we had set this thing up and it started, the war was in full swing down there, didn't allow us to support them any longer, except in a humanitarian effort. So the next thing I knew, I guess because of my contact with the then Vice President of the United States, who actually oversaw, by National Security Decision Directive Number 2, actually oversaw all intelligence operations.
George Bush.
George Bush, having been personally handled by him, and him knowing that I was reactivated and working in this Special Operations Unit in Fort Campbell, Kentucky, they said that we want you to go down posing as a humanitarian down there. And in the briefing with North, I said, what do you mean as a humanitarian? He said, you're going to be a medevac pilot now. You're going to fly medical aircraft into these Contra camps. That's humanitarian. It's allowed. And you'll serve, in the briefing he said, you'll serve 3 entities. You'll serve the United States Army as a medevac pilot. You'll serve the United States Embassy through the military office. And you will serve, and that was CIA, that portion. And you serve the Pegasus operations, that we'll call it, because of your code name. And Pegasus operations are directly controlled by the NSC.
Now, was this North give you this briefing in Colorado when you walked into your shop, or was this later?
No, this was much later. This briefing was actually done in Fort Campbell, Kentucky. Then the next thing I knew,
North gave you the briefing there?
Right. I had.
So North walks into your shop in Colorado, says, "Hey, come on."
No, two agents walked into
Oh, it
the
wasn't
shop in
North.
Colorado.
I thought
No.
Jake was North.
No.
No, okay.
Well, Jake was, but Jake and the Snake came to the crash investigation where my commander had gotten killed.
I see. Okay.
At Fort Campbell, Kentucky.
Right. So the people that walked into Colorado, that was not
They
North.
were just a couple agents coming in to let me know I'm going back to work.
Okay. All right. And then you were briefed by Ollie.
I found that they were actually NSA.
Okay.
So.
You want to explain what NSA is?
National Security Agency. They do a lot of the background checks and everything in the United States. A lot of the spooks who listen to everything that's said here is NSA.
Right. The communications mainly is their job. Like wiretaps and keeping track of all of us via the telephones, and that's their job. So you're in Fort Campbell, you're given this assignment, you're going to be flying in and out medical supplies, right? And where are you flying these medical supplies out of?
Out of the Contra camps. When I finally went down posing as a medevac pilot, we went into the Contra camps. We'd always take coolers in. Usually the coolers going in were C4, explosives, grenades, things like that. And we would bring medical supplies out, and those medical supplies we would bring out in these coolers, big 124 quart coolers, was actually packages, bricks of cocaine.
Okay. Did you actually see this?
Actually saw it, actually tested it.
And where did you do this?
We did field tests right in our medevac offices in Pomerola Air Base.
So before you put it on the plane, you tested, make sure it was real cocaine?
No, we tested them on several occasions. We didn't test every package, but some occasions they were delivered to our operations headquarters at Pomerola to take to an aircraft at a different location to fly out of the country. And whenever that happened, I would actually do a field test on it right there. On occasion, when I could get away with it without anyone seeing me, I'd do a field test on the aircraft. That was pretty hard to do.
Chip, you're flying out of what airfield in the United States?
In Honduras, we were flying out of the Contra camps into 3 airfields. One was San Lorenzo, one was Pomerola, and the other was in the northern part of the country called La Mesa. From there, the coolers were picked up by C-130s, C-141s, or civilian 123s. C-123s run by a company called Corporate Air Services out of Ilopango Air Base in San Salvador.
Corporate Air Services also being CIA.
CIA. And they were flown back into the States, I would find on a meeting on March 24th, 1985, that there were actually 3 different legs that stuff was moved on, and those legs were into Ohio, into Colorado, and into a little place in the center of the country in 1985 called Arkansas.
What airfield in Arkansas?
I know that there were 2 airfields in Arkansas. One was Arkansas Air Force Base, and the other one was a place called Mina.
And how about in Ohio?
Into Dayton, Ohio, and then in Colorado it was into Lamar, Colorado, and Pueblo, Colorado.
So you learned that the drugs are coming in then?
Oh yeah.
Cocaine?
Yeah.
On CIA planes?
Everything went through Panama, and then from Panama it was distributed out.
Were they CIA planes or military planes?
Military and CIA.
Both, huh?
Yeah.
Now, you tested it personally. Do you have any documents that would indicate that this is so?
Yes.
Oh, you do?
Yes.
I had no idea. Of course I did. Of course I did. That was a loaded question, Chip.
I know it was.
I knew the answer to that before I asked it. Okay, tell us about that.
When I started finding the cocaine on board the aircraft, I decided, hey, this could go one of 2 ways. They could set us up pretty darn quick here if they ever wanted to get rid of us. Because of our knowledge, and especially because of my knowledge, because Bill had told me, Chip, watch your butt, buddy. You have some real enemies here in Washington. So what I did is we would be required to file flight plans when we'd leave Palmarola Air Base, where we're based out of in Honduras. We'd file flight plans, and when we'd come back, I'd go to base operations and write on the back of that flight plan what we found, where we took it, who was on board the aircraft, and what went on during the flight. Basically, I debrief right on the back of flight plans. When a trusted Honduran official, who happened to be the brother of the Honduran Army Chief of Staff, saw what I was doing, he said, "We're going to keep these, in a safe place. This is our insurance, Chip." I said, "Oh, okay."
And those notes are available in, right? Tatum Chronicles.
In the Tatum Chronicles.
I'm sorry, those notes are available in the Tatum Chronicles.
I went back to Honduras in 1985 and picked up those certified copies that are in those. In the Tatum Chronicles, it talks about all the people that you've heard of today involved in Honduras, involved in the Contra cocaine issues. Not only that, it also talks about persons before it even happened, because these are certified copies that were sealed in 1985 by Honduran officials. It talks about people who needed to be neutralized and assassinated, and who later were killed.
And Chip, what'd you do with these documents, besides hiding them around the world?
I also published them in the Tatum Chronicles when I was charged with treason. I was told to give these documents up, or I'd be charged with treason and be put to death or spend life imprisonment. So I called the Secret Service officers that came in and told me that were tasked to tell me this by the president, and I called them in and I said, "Okay, boys, I've got the documents for you. Come get them." In the meantime, we published this, sent it to the White House Library, sent it to the White House, to James Dorskin is his name, the personal assistant to the President, Clinton, sent it to Mr. Bush, sent it to others involved, and to Capitol Hill. And then I gave these guys the copy, the Secret Service agents, and they said, "You just signed your death warrant." I said, "Kill me, boys. Let's go."
And I might also mention that you had some other papers and other documents you held back, right?
Over 25 years, I was able to compile quite an insurance policy. These documents are nothing compared to those documents. I feel comfortable in coming forward with these, and the only reason I'm coming forward with these, I had no intention of ever doing anything with these, but when they went after my wife, they went after an American citizen, and that's unacceptable in my mind. Going after other foreign intelligence officers, foreign politicians and all, that's just part of the spook business. That's what we did in counter-espionage, but you don't do that against our own citizens. When you try to neutralize an American citizen, you've gone against everything I believe is right, and I'll do everything I can to expose the men involved.
Now, you have other documents around the world, right? You have videos and printed matter.
Videos, audios that have been placed on the videos, many video clips of different meetings I've attended, different orders being given, documents that have been put on the video. You know, technology is great, Ted. You know, I'd go into some of these high-level meetings, and because I was the chief of security for these groups, I would ensure that nothing's being bugged, the place is clean, so we'd sweep the place, and I'd keep my bugs going the whole time.
So you're the only one that had bugs
I'm the
going?
only one that had the bugs going.
Smart man, Chip Tatum. Okay, that's why you're live today, obviously.
That's why I'm probably one of the safest men alive right now, I think.
I would think so, because if anything happens to you, then these come forward, right?
That's right.
And Chip, I want to come back to this in just a minute, but I want to go back to Central South America, CIA drug running, et cetera, et cetera. Did you have any personal conversations with Ollie North after Fort Campbell?
Sure. On one particular occasion, well, on many occasions, Ollie was down there. I also called him through White House Switch and told him that I found drugs on board the aircraft. I said, you know, Colonel North, what is this? You know, we have drugs on board these aircraft. What are they doing on the aircraft? He said they were, evidence bound for world courts to prosecute the Sandinistas.
How many tons of evidence did you have?
8.
8 tons? Couldn't they just take a sample?
Well, it got worse than that. I would go into these Contra camps, and here would be these large fuel pods that had the tops cut off, and they had they were gelling their own stuff there. You know, they couldn't get enough bazuco, which was the paste used to make cocaine. They couldn't get enough of it from the Medellin cartel that they had ties with. Coming up from Peru, so they started bringing bales of their own leaves and bales of the little green pods. You know, I couldn't figure out what these little green pods were.
Who's they?
The man who was in charge of bringing everything up was a man named Ramon Navarro. He was dressed as a lieutenant colonel in some military. I didn't figure out what uniform he was wearing. Could have been a cabbie uniform, I don't know. But Ramon Navarro, and he would later be killed in 1991. Just before he was scheduled to testify in the Noriega case.
And what about Ollie North? Besides your telephone conversation
Ollie
with
North
him?
was in country on several occasions, and on April 12th, even the Vice President Bush was in country. That
April
was
12th, what year?
1985.
And were North and Bush together?
Not together in the same encampment at that time, no. North was there, but...
So in talking to Ollie North personally, other than the telephone conversation, what was said in regard to drugs being brought in by the CIA and on the Army?
In one cocaine kitchen, as he was talking to Amir Amnir and another intelligence officer, he told them that 1 more year of this and we can all retire.
Now, you heard that conversation?
I taped that conversation.
Oh, very good. You taped that conversation.
Yes, I did.
And what other conversations could you tell us about as far as Ollie North is concerned?
Well, not only conversations. You know, Ollie was... He loved to be the center of attention, so one particular occasion we had him standing at a cocaine press trying to pressing the bricks. In this Sandinista camp? I don't think so. It was, they called these the North camps because North set them up.
And how many such bases were set up?
There were about 5 of the kitchens that were set up.
Did Ollie North set them up?
5 locations. Ollie North is the one who supplied all logistical support for that, yes.
And when was the last time you had a conversation with Ollie North?
Last time I talked to Ollie North was in September of 1994. He and Felix Rodriguez called me in my office in Colorado. I'd gone back to Colorado, gotten out of the business, gone back to Colorado. 25 years was enough. And he called me and told me to give up the documents or else.
The documents that you had in hiding?
Those flight plans and so forth.
Yeah, but had you already printed?
No.
You hadn't given them printed yet. Okay.
No. I wasn't going to say anything. I was sitting in Colorado as just a little businessman, running a mortgage company, not bothering anyone, just wanting to raise my family.
What did you tell him?
I told him, "Are you crazy? If I give you these, for one thing, they're headed for the shredder, and for another thing, I know it's a terminal effort. There's no way. Let's go for or else. I'm always a fighter."
What did he say to that?
Well, he said, "Well, let me get someone else." And they called me back, and Bill Colby was on the phone. And I said, "Bill," I said, "you know, to give these documents up, to give all this stuff up is terminal." I said, "You know, I'm going to keep them." And he said, "Well, you know, then we're going to have to hit your credibility." I said, "Okay, hit my credibility. What do you want me to do?" He said, "Well, walk into the U.S. Attorney's office and just tell him you did something wrong. So I did.
What'd you tell him?
Walked into the U.S. Attorney's office. I wired myself some money out of an account down across the state line, and then into my corporation. Then I took it out, and put it into my personal account. And because in the mortgage business that can be considered embezzlement. I told him that I participated in wire fraud. Arrest me, please. And so they did, but then they found out, once they put the attorney on it, they found out, well, you know, it's really not, the mortgage industry really isn't regulated in Colorado. I said, listen, I'm going to admit to this, because they said that they wanted to involve my wife in it. I said, but you guys have to promise you leave her out of this. They said, okay. I said, let's go forward with the pleading. So I stood in front of a federal judge, and I said, and he asked me if I did this, and I said, yes. But before I said yes, I leaned over and I asked the U.S. Attorney, my wife's going to stay clear, and she said yes. And so I said, okay, I'll sign the plea agreement, Your Honor. And he said, and it's part of testimony, he really didn't want to go forward with it. He said, you know, this really doesn't, and I said, Your Honor, believe me, I wired those funds, I took those funds, I spent them.
How much money involved?
$70,000 of my money.
Of your own money, huh?
Of my own money.
Okay, but they didn't leave your wife alone.
They didn't. They came after her, and so when I went before the judge for sentencing, I told him at that time, you know, I didn't want to go forward with it. I'd like to withdraw the plea. But it was too late at that point. He said, the thing to do is, after this is all done, you can go ahead and ask that the plea be withdrawn at the appeals court. And that's where we're at now.
And you're getting ready in a couple of days to go in. You've appealed it. The appellate level, you're going to have a decision in about 2 more days, right?
On the 24th of February.
Are you looking at prison time?
No, I don't think so. I've already spent 2 years of that time in prison, and I don't think that they want me back in prison. I really don't think they want me back in prison.
They want you to be quiet.
I was due to do 47 months, and the last thing they wanted was me in prison, simply because there were death threats against me in prison, and 2 NSA officers came in to see me when I was in prison at Jessup and told me that the warden advised them that there were people that wanted to kill me from the Mexican Mafia and the Crips and the Bloods, that I had crossed them the wrong way, I'd hurt some of their men. Actually, I didn't. I wasn't offensive toward them. They have their little scams that go on, and I wouldn't participate. So their enforcers, one of their enforcers, I broke his leg, and they didn't like that. So they had a hit out on me, a contract in prison to take me out. And the NSA came in and said, you can't allow this to happen. If you're killed, those tapes will come forward. And I said, that's right. And they said, well, you got to give us the tapes. I said, kids, are you crazy? And it's unbelievable. They send such young kids in. At least they could send somebody mature, you know, that I would have a little respect for. But they send them young and dumb. That's the way they do it.
Well, there's 2 factions in the CIA, I understand now. The graybeards and what do they call the other faction? The snot-nosed Bush kids?
Yeah, that's it. Snot-nosed Clinton.
Snot-nosed Clinton now, huh?
Snot-nosed Clinton.
Okay, Chip. So didn't they charge you with treason at one point?
Well, yeah. When I was held in prison before the trial that I went through, they told me that if I didn't give the documents up, I'd be charged with treason. And I said, okay, let's dance. And that's when I actually published this, gave them their copies, and went forward and right in the Tatum Chronicles. I mean, the Tampa Tribune caught on to it pretty quick, and did a big article. County inmate faces mysterious charge of treason. Well, you know, they knew they weren't going to be able to go forward with that particular charge, so they had to find something else. So what they ended up charging us
They
with,
couldn't go forward with the embezzlement charge, what you're saying.
No, they couldn't go forward with that. They couldn't go forward with the treason charge. So what they did is they brought in a man, a lieutenant colonel, who...
Not Ollie North.
No, Ollie North's campaign manager.
Oh, really?
Bill Lusinger. They gave him complete immunity. Actually, not complete immunity. He came in, he said, Tatum conspired with me to make a false statement. I embezzled some funds, but Tatum told me I could have them.
Got you for conspiracy again.
Got me for conspiracy because a person came forward and and said that an overt act had taken place.
Well, no, he'd been convicted himself, right,
He had
of
been convicted
embezzlement.
of bank fraud and embezzlement and everything
Okay,
else.
and so what did he do? Make a deal with the government to get his sentence reduced if he come in and lie about it?
It's better than that. He was facing 20 years for his stuff, but if he came in and told a good enough lie, he would get 6 months and it would be expunged from his record.
Is he out?
He actually got 6 weeks, yes, and it was expunged from his record. And he didn't have to pay back the 80 grand or whatever it was.
So he's a rich man.
Oh, yeah.
Within reason, that is. Chip, before I want to let's continue now with the problems involving the court and so forth. Anything else you want to mention? They came after Nancy, your wife. By the way, let me mention, folks, there's a separate interview with Nancy Tatum, which goes into detail. And we talk about Nancy's new book, Joining Club Fed.
Joining Club Fed.
And that's worth checking out and purchasing and reading because that substantiates and corroborates what Chip is telling us here right today. Is there anything else you want to mention about the court proceedings?
Well, I think the important thing for everyone to know is the United States federal courts are not your friend. They're not, and the United States federal court officers are definitely not your friends, although they would like to let you think that they're on your side. They want to do everything for you and your family, so work with them on this. They're not going to do that. And that's quite evident even today. We see just recently two men were actually arrested on a big anthrax scare. The courts didn't investigate it. They just got from a non-credible source that something was happening, and they went out and arrested them.
This is Larry Wayne Harris and Bill Levitt.
That's correct.
In Las Vegas, Nevada.
And now they're finding out that these microbiologists were actually putting together a vaccine for anthrax. You know, they don't think.
And I told the new, by the way, I was personally involved in that case. I had interviewed Larry Harris a day before he was arrested on my local talk TV station program, Ted Gunderson Intelligence Report. And the media talked to me after they were arrested. I said, nothing to it. Believe me, it's going to go away. These men are not terrorists. They're talking about defensive protection, not offense. Go ahead, Chip.
Well, and that's right. And the court system as it's set up today is not set up as a tool for justice. It's set up as a tool for retribution. Anyone that they want, they can get. And you're going to spend 2 years in jail until you get to appellate level where you have a little bit of a chance for justice to be heard, but never at the district level.
Chip, going back to George Bush, how many conversations did you have with George Bush?
Hundreds.
Hundreds when he was head of the CIA? By phone and in person or both?
Not as many, probably about 30 at the CIA, but more post-CIA after 1986. When I was placed into what's called the operational subgroups, where I worked alongside Danish intelligence, Turkish intelligence, British intelligence, Mossad. We had groupings of foreign intelligence officers that worked directly under the Vice President and later the President of the United States.
Did George Bush have knowledge about the drug operation coming out of Central America and South America?
Yes.
Explain.
Well, he was in one of the camps.
It
Produced the cocaine.
Yeah, but did he know about it?
He was standing at a press.
George was also, in addition to Ollie.
George Bush was standing right at a cocaine press.
And did you have a picture of that?
In a place called Roos Roos. I have a picture of something.
Okay, we won't go into that. So George Bush was aware of it too. Ollie North was aware of it. How about Clinton?
Bush was absolutely aware of it, and I can say that because on the 24th of March 1985, William Barr, who would later become Attorney General.
Attorney General, know him well, know of him well.
William Barr actually called Vice President Bush via SATCOM and talked to him about the loss of over $100 million in assets of the enterprise. And we all know the enterprise today as being the company that, or the operation that Ollie North set up.
$100 million? And who got their grubby hands on that?
It was decided that there were three entities involved, not one particular person, but Noriega had involvement, that Barry Seal had involvement, and that the governor of Arkansas, who was involved in it at the time, Bill Clinton, had involvement in it.
And of the three, Seal has been murdered. Noriega's in jail.
Noriega was to be murdered, though, during
yeah,
the assault.
They took the troops down there in '89 to eliminate him, and he survived by going into, I think, a Catholic church, didn't he? Or
right. Well, Bobby Hunt, SEAL Team Commander SEAL Team 2 commander had orders to go in and shoot Noriega when he tried to get out at the airport. He never showed up there because we told him ahead of time. The CIA told him he's a friend of the CIA. He was an enemy of Bush. That's nothing more than a business deal gone bad. We let him know ahead of time that there was a contingency coming in to assassinate him, needed to get to a safe house. So he chose that particular church as a safe house.
The Catholic Church.
Catholic Church got cameras out there so that he was safe.
And now the only one that's left is Bill Clinton. And did Bill Clinton take the $200 million, $100 million, whatever it was?
He got a large portion of it, very large portion of it. However, you know, I'm going to tell you now, Bush is a very vindictive man. I don't think that Clinton's out of the water with it. You know, I think he's still in some hot water, and that could be a lot of the pressure that he's seeing today. It may be a little bit of a vendetta to get even. You never have to get even tomorrow, Ted. In the business that we're in, you never push for something to happen right away unless there's an operational need for that. Time is always on your side.
Time down the road, whatever. You're talking about the Monica Lewinsky situation, right? Maybe that has something, maybe it doesn't.
If you look historically, I know that I was told that Bush was going to leave bugs in the White House when he left. Why would he do that to another president unless he has a personal interest or personal vendetta there? The bugs in the White House, folks, don't mean electronic bugs. You know, the best bug in the world or the best information in the world is called human intelligence. So what you do is you take these career White House personnel and you put them in the White House, and they're listening and they're keeping track of everything that's going on. Well, it's hard to put an electronic device in the White House. If Starr thought that he could take Tripp or Lewinsky and put a bug on them and get them in the White House, all they'd end up was that person in prison for trying to bug someone in the White House. You don't get into the White House with a bug, but you get in there with a brain that can keep that intelligence in it and pass it on. That's how you get in, and that's how you bug the White House. So he always had constant information flowing to him from the White House from career workers in the White House. You know, why did they all of a sudden throw these people out of the travel office? Perhaps they thought that maybe there was a little intelligence work going on there.
Probably.
Tripp.
Clinton, yeah.
Let's look at Tripp. She was taken out of there right after Vince Foster because she talked about it. Wham, she's out of the White House and into other areas. You know, there's a lot to be looked at that's just overlooked by the mainstream media because I'm told I have a pretty devious mind. Well, you know, it's because I worked for these guys and I know how they think.
Chip, as far as Ollie North is concerned, you told me in one of the radio interviews I had with you that you had some recordings, audio recordings of a conversation in the back of an airplane. Was that with Ollie North or somebody else?
No, that was with Mike Harari and a man named Raymond Buddy Young. That was actually presented at our SEPA briefing in Tampa, Florida to Judge Adams. The recording was presented. We have transcripts of that, and we've actually put them in the Tatum Chronicles.
So now, when you say SEPA, you're talking about your hearing before the judge where you discuss classified information, right? Right.
During the course, as we were leading up to the trial, there are certain filings that have to be done prior to a trial and hearings. And in April of 1996, just before the trial, the U.S. Attorney's Office gained information that perhaps I would attempt to disclose classified information from my previous work. So they filed a motion with the courts that required me to file a briefing, an actual brief, outlining any classified information that I would attempt to use in my defense.
And then the judge rules on it whether or not you can use it.
Then the judge rules on it. He had the decision that the judge has to make under the SEPA requirements is, first of all, is it classified in any way? Second, does it involve national security issues? So after being presented with that material, and it has to be done in declaration, under oath, the materials were provided to them. And let me tell you something, if anything I said in there was false, I would have been charged with perjury. There was never a perjury charge. The issues that were given to him were investigated. I was never charged with perjury or obstruction of justice, trying to say that this happened when it didn't. You know, that's an obstruction of justice charge. No charges like that ever came out. That's a pretty big issue.
Was the judge sympathetic, you think, and objective?
You know, Nancy talks about this judge being a terrible judge, but let me tell you something. It's obvious to me, working in the arena that I work in, he knew what was going on. He made the decisions that he made, so there would be no question at the appellate court that justice was not served.
So actually, he probably was your friend then.
He's the only reason that I can talk about it today. By him saying that this information was not classified and doesn't have to do with national security, the CIA can't come back on me, national security folks can't come back on me for talking about what I presented to that court at the time.
Chip, let's go back, and we've talked about Ollie North, we've talked about George Bush, we talked a little bit about Clinton. Did Clinton, do you have any direct knowledge that Clinton had, was aware of the drug operation coming into Arkansas?
The direct knowledge is that Buddy Young was actually a advisor to Clinton. He was his chief of security, and he was one on board the aircraft, and he was sent there by Clinton to investigate the loss of monies that had been determined. Additional direct knowledge comes in the fact that one of the people called by Barr was the governor of Arkansas on that SATCOM. He called North, he called the vice president on this 24th of March conversation, and he called the governor of Arkansas and talked to him. So, and governor of Arkansas then was William Jefferson Clinton. So they were talking about the enterprise, about the lost monies. And additionally, in earlier years, when I was at Fort Campbell, Kentucky, I actually flew several missions carrying medical coolers again with money and drugs in it into Arkansas.
Out of where, Fort Campbell?
Out of Fort Campbell. It was delivered to us by the 324th Med Battalion.
Out of the South America?
Out of South America. They were operating in the South America in Honduras. It was flown by C-130 to Fort Campbell. It was marked medical supplies. Donor organs, this particular one was marked. And we were advised to give it to Dr. Lassiter at Little Rock Air Force Base. So we flew it to Little Rock Air Force Base. I opened the coolers. I don't fly a cooler without opening it. I don't fly anything without opening it. Let me tell you why I don't fly coolers without opening them. I was told by Colby earlier that Torrijos died simply because they put a cooler marked donor organs on his aircraft that blew up in flight. So whenever I see a cooler, I open that cooler.
And what did you find in the cooler?
We found a large sum of money and 3 kilos of cocaine in one cooler. In the other cooler, we found all cocaine. Those 2 coolers were picked up by Dr. Lassiter, who actually ended up being, as we found out in later years, a man named Dan Lassiter, who was convicted for trafficking cocaine in Arkansas. However, he was pardoned by the then governor of Arkansas, Bill Clinton.
And did you have any information that Clinton had direct knowledge of that? No, you flew him into Arkansas. Was Clinton there waiting for it, or was there a limousine there or anything like that?
We had to wait over an hour and a half for Dr. Lassiter to show up. But when he finally showed up, he showed up in an entourage of vehicles. There was a van, there was a stretch limo, and an unmarked police car. In the coming out of the stretch limo, Dr. Lassiter came forward. He had 2 people with him. One stayed at the car and one came over. He introduced the one that walked over to the aircraft to pick up the coolers as the governor of Arkansas. And the governor of Arkansas extended his hand, and that's the first time I shook the hand of William Jefferson Clinton. He wanted to let me know that the people of Arkansas appreciated me bringing those donor organs.
Because he didn't know you'd looked into them.
He didn't know I looked into it.
Do you have that in your book?
Yes, I do.
Yeah, that's in, again, the Tatum Chronicles, right? Okay, Chip. Now, what about the truth serum, truth drugs that the CIA uses? We need to talk about that.
Sure.
People can be alert for it.
You know, I talked a little bit about in those containers down in South America, the processing that was done, and during the processing of cocaine, there were these little green pod-like things. I would later find out, working on the international side, that these little pods came from the nightshade family. They were used to produce a chemical called a form of what's called scopolamine, but it's a much stronger potion than what is commercially made. This stuff's made from the orange blossoming trumpet from the nightshade family, and we use it. We nicknamed it. It's called Burudenga, the voodoo drug. We use that to drug a target. We can put them under our complete power with a properly induced drug. They'll do whatever we ask them to do, and when the drug wears off, they won't remember anything that went on during the drugging.
Used quite extensively. Used quite extensively.
Used quite extensively, yeah. You know, every time I hear of an instance, to give you an example where an assassination is committed and someone comes forward and on the political side, now not just in a small town, but on the political side when there are political assassinations like Rabin. I was in prison at the time, but there's no doubt in my mind that was a Burundanga assassination. This kid apparently shot Rabin, went in and admitted to shooting him, and then 3 days later said he doesn't remember shooting him. He didn't remember ever signing any statement saying that that's Burundanga.
You see that quite regularly, really.
Oh yeah,
don't you?
And it's actually becoming epidemic proportions. We've used it for years in the CIA, but now it's out in the general populace. And in Colombia, a lot of the gangs have it now, have access to it, and they're using it to rob people of their bank accounts. And I mean, a guy will get hit with Burundanga, given a Coke that has Burundanga in it, take a drink of it, and next thing he knows, his bank account is empty, and he'd given it to this one of these drug gangs.
And they give him instructions, tell him what to do, he does it, and then 3 days later he doesn't remember.
They'll do anything. They'll shoot a person, they'll shoot themselves. They'll do anything you tell them to do.
What about drugs that the CIA uses to induce heart attacks and death?
Those are usually two-part poisons, compounds, so that they're not connected to a poison. We can, to ensure that a person gets the first portion, we've gone in and, like in an embassy, in one part of the world, we would put it in a punch so that most of the people are dosed with the first part of the compound, and then you have about 3 weeks before the second part of the compound has to be given to the target, and then that's the first gets into the muscles and in the heart, and it'll show up only as a compound. Once the second comes in, it'll show up in the blood only as a compound, but it actually induces a heart attack. People actually die of a heart attack, and that's why the coroners always report these as heart attacks, because it's really a heart attack, and there's no poison that shows up. It would only be a compound in the body.
Chip, is there any other particular areas you'd like to discuss before we conclude the interview?
I don't think so, Ted. I think
we covered it pretty well.
We have said quite a bit.
There was one other area I want to ask you about in conclusion then. What about Jupiter Island and the New World Order plans?
In the 1980s and 1990s, I was tasked under the Terrorist Incident Working Group to a unit called the Operational Subgroups. Many of our meetings in 89, 90, 91 were held in southeast Florida on Jupiter Island, in a briefing in a home of an affluent woman, and we held our briefings there. Those briefings would normally follow the G7 conferences and summits, and the reason it would normally follow that is because at that time, remember I said we were working as an international group, not necessarily just U.S. Intelligence officers. Under this international plan, they were looking toward doing a master plan for the whole world. You know, even as a community, as your community has a development plan to help develop the community into a better place, these people have their plans to develop the world into a better place. And I would sit in meetings and they would come to us and say, well, you know, we have a problem in this arena. We have a very uncooperative government, say in France. We need to do something there. So it would be tasked over to the operations and plans section of the operational subgroups to come up with a plan on what to do. So we would go into our planning phase. We'd look into say France and decide, well, you know, the president in France just isn't cooperating here. You know, he's kind of a loose cannon. What can we do? Well, let's do a little counterintelligence work, incite some riots or something like that. And that's what we did to help neutralize these countries and these leaders. Sometimes we go into a country and wipe out that leader's bank account and let him know, you know.
But you had the power to do that.
Sure we had.
Well, didn't you have a situation in Central or South America where the leader of the country was not cooperating and he thumbed his nose basically at the CIA U.S. government, and you said, well, within 2 weeks, your brother or one of your relatives would be eliminated. Is that true?
Daniel Ortega, the president of Nicaragua. We didn't have to pose that whole war down there to get him to have elections. All we needed to do was neutralize him, and we knew that all along. We went in. We told Ortega, "You're going to hold free elections within, and you need to announce that." He said, "Well, I'm not going to do it." So our emissary came back and told us he's not going to do it. We sent him back down. Once it was given to the subgroups, we sent him down and told him to tell Rafael, or tell him that Rafael's going to die in 2 weeks.
Rafael was who?
His second cousin.
Okay.
Good friend of his, one of his best friends. And so he put thousands. He put him in a compound. Was protected by a large contingency of troops. But on the day that we told him he would die, he died.
Do you want to say how he died?
Rocket fire.
In a car?
Well, no, in the compound. It was rocket fire, but we also had people on the ground there too. So whether it was rocket fire or whether it was a bullet to the head, you know.
Well, now Jupiter.
There wasn't enough left to tell.
Unfortunately, now Jupiter Island. Who were?
Let me qualify.
Okay.
Within 2 weeks, Ortega announced that there would be free elections in that country because he was next.
Right, and you told him that.
We told him that.
How about going back to Jupiter Island? Who attended these meetings at Jupiter Island?
Had quite a few big names in those, and I'll talk about a couple of those, but I won't go beyond that because I like talking. I like breathing. I like eating. No matter how good my insurance is, I know that there's some people you never talk about.
Right.
So I won't. George Bush was one who would normally attend those meetings, if not personally, at least through teleconferencing. An additional member that was always there was the man who still commanded me in these operations and who actually recruited me into black operations. His name was Bill Colby.
Who's now dead?
Who's now dead.
Mysterious death.
When I walked away, I was told you don't just walk away, and I believe he walked away too, and that's why.
Right, mysterious death.
Another person who was there who oversaw all of our finances now runs the Judicial Oversight Committee in the
William
United
Hyde?
States Congress. Henry Hyde.
I mean Henry Hyde.
Uncle Henry.
Henry Hyde, U.S. Congressman from Illinois.
That's the man. So you think you're going to get judicial parity? I don't think so.
That reminds me, Chip. I have some other names I could run by you, but I won't put you on the spot, okay?
I appreciate that, Ted.
Let's see. He's a man. I'm not going to call him. I met him in the White House myself on one occasion. Not General Haig, but somebody else. Let's see. That was 1973 for me. I had another thought that I wanted to bring up, and I'll remember it down the road.
Well,
here.
you had asked me earlier what I'm doing these days, and let me tell you what I'm doing. You know, being a spook by trade, you can't just walk away. You can't just give it up. And you asked me what I'm doing on your radio show. What are your plans? And right now, I'm working as the two-county coordinator for the American Red Cross. And the reason I'm working as a two-county coordinator in Florida for the American Red Cross is it gives me the opportunity to interface directly with probably one of the darkest organizations the United States has ever seen, and that's FEMA.
Oh, we know about FEMA.
So I've been able to effectively infiltrate FEMA. I'm the person who deals directly with them in all issues and sit in meetings with them, and little did they know that they had a spook in their midst.
They know it now.
Yeah, they know it now. I told them last week in my last meeting with them.
Well, then you have some pretty good information, I think, don't you?
I waited till I got what I needed, and then I put it on the website. I did a big article on the website, exposed what they have going, how they effectively hope to take over. You know, the big thing with FEMA is that if the United States ever goes in to martial law, which can be put in place any time now because of Clinton's recent filings under the National Security
Executive
Act.
orders.
Right. Since he's declared a national state of emergency already, all he has to do is have a nuclear, biological, or chemical threat active, and he can declare martial law. That's going to be pretty easy if he pushes Saddam into blowing up a biological, or if he shows the United States that there are people here, factions here, trying to do that, like they just tried to do with Harris. He can then effectively declare martial law. If he does that, though, the people who really take over the country and run things is FEMA. So you have to make sure, and I don't know that James E. Witt, the current head of FEMA, is one who goes along with this plan. He just, you know, and sitting in our briefings and everything, he's just not one that's going to do it. So.
Well, didn't they replace him, or aren't they replacing him?
So quietly, last fall, they opened some offices in Washington at FEMA headquarters and brought their Region 6 administrator, a man named Raymond Buddy Young.
Oh, we mentioned him earlier, right?
Bill
Security
Clinton's
officer.
Security chief.
That's right.
Is taking over FEMA.
Well, we'll see what happens in the future. Of course, we know FEMA is Federal Emergency Management Agency, and they have they take precedent over all law enforcement, federal and local,
And
in the event of
military.
and military in the event of a national emergency.
That's correct.
What a very clever plan devised by. That was originally set up by Bush, wasn't it?
Yeah, it actually came from years ago. And if folks would ever want to go to the website and read that article, it's available there. It's called FEMA, the Dark Underbelly.
What's your website?
It's if they'll go to www.2.net and then just click on the Black Ops at the bottom of the page, they'll go right to the website.
What about prison camps? You had information about prison camps.
When we would fly cross country in Black Ops, in Special Ops, we would normally RO in at different areas. Nellis Air Force Base was one. A lot of military bases where they have large encampment areas that are built. We would RO in, we'd stay in those encampment areas. High security encampment areas, no cargo inside. They aren't built for cargo. They aren't built to store things. They're built for people. What they intend on doing with that, I don't know, but they're in place.
How many prison camps would you say?
You know, I know of 5 or 6 that I saw. I also know that the United States Bureau of Prisons is in the process of acquiring land across the U.S. In Coleman, Florida. They just acquired 1,200 acres for a prison, and they don't need near that for a prison. That's a big area.
Well, they already have a prison, in federal prison in Coleman, Florida.
Yeah, that's correct.
There's a political prisoner there named Michael Reconnaissance, who I'm in contact with regularly.
Right.
Ex-agency also, by the way.
Right.
Well, you know, in Texas, there are 8 prisons that have been built in recent years. They are staffed, but there's no inmates there. Is that the case in the prison camps that you were in?
Yeah, they were staffed with security, you know, just skeleton crew security.
But no inmates.
No inmates, no.
Watch out, be careful. It's right around the corner, it looks like.
And I don't prefer the word inmates. I prefer the name prisoners or convicts. If you're convicted, you're a convict. If you're not convicted, you're a prisoner.
Is there anything else you want to mention about FEMA?
No, I think that's about it. It's probably one of the darkest agencies that we have. Really, its power is, they have unbridled power to do anything. You know, it takes Congress right out of the act. All Clinton has to do, or all the president, whoever it may be, has to do is from time to time report to Congress. That means he can send a 3x5 card to them, say, hey guys, things are fine and dandy. Come on back to work someday, but not today.
What about Rothschild, Rockefeller? Do you have any connections there? The CIA and some of the cool.
Not the CIA.
Rockefeller. Let me see. I keep forgetting about the mic. How about the Rockefeller, Rothschilds, and that bunch? Do you have anything that would tie them into the CIA operation, covert operation?
Not CIA, but in Black Ops and when we talk about the G7 meetings and setting things in place, the powerful families always have input to the politicians that they've placed in power. And so in that arena, it's very easily for them to get their own desires taken care of. On a number of occasions, we've done work for them.
You're talking about Jupiter Island now?
Yes.
So they have representatives there?
Well, sure.
Do you know, I know you know about the Bilderbergers, Council of Foreign Relations, Trilateral Commission. Were the representatives of those organizations there?
No, when you talk about the Bilderbergers and G7, you're really talking about the same group of people, because the G7 are the politicians representing all these group of people. And some of these top politicians bring in their desires, and this is what we want to do, and Amschel Rothschild wants this done before he died, and it was done.
And then Rupert Murdoch put out the word to 600 of his various news outlets and said under no circumstances mention homicide, either natural causes or suicide, and of course they came out with he hung himself, and then the French police came along and said, wait a minute, it was murder, he was murdered. You remember that?
Yeah.
More control of the media.
Hung himself on a towel rack in a hotel. Now folks, how many people of you hung a wet towel on the towel rack and it fell out of the wall?
Exactly.
Kind of tough.
That's right. Chip, there's a couple other areas I thought about.
Okay.
And they just come back to my memory now, because we've been skipping around now at the end. You mentioned on my radio show how you we mentioned Henry Hyde earlier, how you dealt with some of your assignments financially. You want to go into that? You had an attorney in northern New York, and you could walk into certain banks, and on your signature you get $250,000 without any difficulty.
Well, in the earlier years with the CIA, you know, all of us understand. I think a lot of us have seen the movie Air America, how the CIA would set up they're called proprietary companies. We learned early from those efforts that we could do that in the Black Ops arena also. Working for the operational subgroups, we would set up what's called proprietary companies. We have trusted attorneys across the nation and around the world that will set up these proprietary corporations as an everyday business, so that we can work an intelligence operation out of who knows, you may be sitting in the Xerox Corporation and it's not really, not that that's it. However, I will say the Wilson family was heavily involved with us in the upstate New York area, and that's the Xerox family, and seeing to funding. We would set up businesses to see that use as covers so that we could provide operations. In upstate New York, we did it because we were working that border area in Canada, bringing weapons and personnel across the border covertly.
Into the Indian reservation?
There, we use the Indian reservations on occasion because it's a federally protected area. But normally, I just fly low level under radar. It's a non-radar environment, practically. So I just bring personnel and equipment across as needed. You know, both ways. I take people out of the country and bring people into the country. What they did with those people, I don't know, but some of them were pretty top.
Well, you know their identity too.
Right.
So you're talking about bringing foreigners in?
Right.
From other countries, of course, from Europe, et cetera, where they were secretly bringing them in. Where? Meetings in Washington?
Sometimes we were bringing in some pretty famous criminals to meet with people too.
Mafia? From overseas?
From overseas. People that we thought were gone for years and years that we'd bring in for meetings. They're just in sanctuary somewhere.
Let's go back to did I state it properly when I said on your signature you could pick up $250,000 cash?
On my signature, $250,000. It was set up by an attorney out of Rochester, New York, who was a company man.
Is he alive today, the attorney in Rochester, New York?
No, he died.
Heart attack?
I don't know. But he's no longer with us.
He shouldn't have had that punch.
No, I will say, though, that he was ill, even when he was working with us. But I had a $250,000 line of credit. I could walk in, and the reason we had that is these missions, you know, they're not cheap. You have to hire your assets in, and I would have to pay men from $25,000 to $50,000 per mission to work for us, and that's how it was done. It was done with cash. You know, we don't say
paper trail.
Where's your checking account? Here's your at the end of each month. They didn't get a what's it called, a pay stub showing them their withholding and everything.
No, yeah, no IRS problem. At least that way, right?
That's what I love about the media. You know, you read about black operations, and the media always wants to say, "Well, I want to see your pay stub from that." Well, these guys are just about brainless. I don't know any other way to say it.
And now speaking of Henry Hyde, we talked about him earlier. He was the one that kept track of your $250,000 withdrawals.
Well, he set up the account and got the line of credit for us. And he could do that because he was heavily involved in the banking industry. Where the guarantees for that money came from, I don't know. But I know that they always had to have a participating banker in the bank that we used. And this particular banker was one of the vice presidents of commercial lending. So,
Chip, let's go back now. And you were asked to coordinate an operation against a fellow American at one point, and that's when you, according to your previous interviews with me on the radio, decided you had enough. Mm-hmm. Tell us about the meeting that you attended where you announced that.
Well, you know, Ted, this was simply the final straw. I had been asked on numerous occasions to participate in operations against American citizens. From the time I joined the operational subgroups in '86, They targeted U.S. citizens, they targeted foreign citizens, and in the intelligence community, fair game for us, our targets were what we thought of as criminals, intelligence officers, and politicians around the world that we target to influence outcomes of certain things. But when they started targeting U.S. citizens, you know, having been a target at one time myself in Vietnam, I was a target.
You're a little sensitive then.
I'm very sensitive when it came to that, and I told.
Not to mention when they targeted Nancy.
Yeah, that's right. That was it. I'll tell you.
That
brought
broke.
my wrath.
That's it, right?
When,
Okay.
when I was
and good
asked,
for you. Huh?
When I was asked in '92 to see to it that Ross Perot was neutralized, and when I say neutralized, it means that we can intimidate him, we could coerce him, which is a little stronger, more strong-arm tactics, or we could terminate him. And the man who actually gave the order to do that was George Bush, the President of the United States.
And this was in a meeting you attended.
It was in Jupiter Island. He wanted Ross Perot neutralized. I went to a friend who's a federal officer. I walked out that day. I dropped a tape on the table. It had been my insurance policy, and I so that they could see what I had, I let them know, this is what I have. If I die, it'll come forward.
Now this is you're in a meeting and you said, I've had it, this is enough. Put the tape down, hey guys, I'm leaving, you left. Do you think that they reviewed the tape immediately?
I bet they couldn't get it in a VCR quick enough.
I would imagine they had a stampede right behind you with the tape in hand.
I talked to Colby.
The first VCR machine.
I talked to Bill after that. He was in the meeting, and he said that they just looked at each other stunned at first. They just couldn't believe it, because Bill told me on the spot. He said, Chip, you can't walk away from black operations. And that's when I put it down and a smile came across his face, because he's the one that told me to do it. He's the one that taught me to make it.
They told you how to do it, huh?
He knew on all those meetings what I was doing. You know, here I'd sit there with a briefcase, pointing the briefcase. It was pretty obvious to him. He and I were the only real spooks in the meeting, that, you know, other than some of the other...
You were the only two real loyal Americans then, weren't you?
Well, yeah, others were Mossad agents and so forth, but they're protected by this too. Most of the guys in the OSGs are protected. When I say that there's 8 different officers, they're not necessarily U.S. officers.
What are the other countries represented there?
The Mossad, and British intelligence. Those 3 entities are compile the 8 men that protects right now.
Wait a minute, the Mossad, British and American?
The Mossad, British and American.
But didn't you have other countries represented there?
We had Danish intelligence, we had Turkish intelligence, yeah. But that was, sometimes Australians, you know, had input in, but that was about it.
Well,
I think they had Australians because they could shoot over to China pretty quick.
I have good information that the CIA was responsible for let's say eliminating one of the Australian forms of government and bringing in their own people. Do you remember that?
Yeah, I remember that.
Yeah, I have some other contacts of my own that have told me that before. And by the way, I no longer receive Christmas cards from that fellow anymore. Since I went public.
Since you went public with it? Yeah. All heart, Ted.
Oh, my Christmas card list has dropped drastically. It went from like that down to about like that when you stack the cards one on one. But I don't worry about that. Neither do you. No, because we know we're doing the right thing. Chip, there were some other questions I wanted to ask you. Chip.
Ted.
Hey, wait a minute. How do I know you're telling me the truth?
Because you like me, Ted.
Now, I hugged Nancy, but I'm not going to hug you. No, Chip, what I'm telling you, the answer I want to that is...
I can give you an answer.
I know you can. That's why I asked it.
Okay.
Tell me. Tell them.
I'm telling the truth because I have it documented. You don't have to take my word for it. It's documented. It's not only documented in the documents here, it's also documented in federal documents.
Oh, it is.
Court case.
Tell us about that.
There's a federal trial that took place. During that federal trial, the SEPA briefing, everything was put in place. There are transcripts to that available to the public. All you have to do is do a filing, Freedom of Information Act filing, but you really don't even have to do that. You can walk right into the federal courts in Tampa, Florida, pay your $25 to the clerk and get copies of it without even putting a filing in, because that judge made sure that that SEPA briefing wasn't classified.
Chip, you're the only you don't have ex-CIA. You're the only CIA agent that I've known, and I've known a few of them through the years, who can come forward and say, it's documented, the CIA admits that I worked for them. That's in that document, right?
It's in the document.
Yeah. Now,
never a denial on the government's part.
now, can somebody call Washington, D.C., a certain number and say,
Sure.
is Chip Tatum, or was he an employee of the CIA? Who would they call?
Doyce Gene Tatum Jr., just call the personnel office at Langley. On the documents is my social security number at Tampa. You can get the social security number. You can actually get the case number from the court and use that and find out if I was an employee.
Okay.
It's pretty cut and dry. There's no denying who I worked for.
No, yeah, right. Okay, but you're the only
The
one.
only thing that they can deny is what I have to say.
But they always deny it, or they
Oh,
say
sure.
we have no record, and
Sure.
the CIA agents are not allowed to even identify themselves as CIA. Let's face it.
Well, and that's law.
That's by law, right?
That's by law.
Yeah.
Sure.
So if some guys go,
because this federal judge made this ruling, it's not
and
law.
some guy goes around saying I'm a CIA agent, don't believe him.
Yeah. No,
Isn't that right?
That's right.
And I've heard of this. Okay, before we discuss Nixon's darkest secret book, we've already talked about Tatum Chronicles.
And Nixon's darkest secret is Operation Red Rock.
Operation Red Rock, which we went in detail right in the beginning.
You bet.
Are there any other comments you want to make or anything else you want to discuss?
Well, we've sent Operation Red Rock out to publishers around the United States, but there's some liability problems because I name the names, and these are pretty powerful guys. A couple of them are still alive, so it's difficult for them to do the publishing, so we've self-published. But the remarks that I get back from everyone, including Hollywood, is this is one of the best reads we've ever had.
Oh, are you kidding?
Really,
what a great
an
movie.
exciting book.
Yeah, what a great movie.
So we do have someone who's willing to go forward with a movie on Operation Red Rock now, but we're going to have to fictionalize it a little bit so that there's not that liability.
Are you going to have a movie of it?
Yes.
Oh, great.
Yeah. There'll be a movie within the next couple of years, I'll say.
Ah, great. Fantastic. And
They can get that by calling our 1-800 number, 800-201-7892, and ask for extension 58. Just tell them you want Nixon's darkest secret or Operation Red Rock, same thing. That's one of the darkest secrets of Nixon's life, the fact that he ordered 13 American soldiers murdered.
And of course, they can also order the Tatum Chronicles.
Those Tatum Chronicles got me charged with treason, Ted, and thrown in prison for 2 years. I think it's worth looking at if you people would like to order the Tatum Chronicles. Again, 1-800-201-7892. Make copies of the documents, give them to the media, challenge anybody. Show me where they're wrong. They can't do it.
Okay, also, folks, you can purchase this video. I know you're looking at it right now, but if you want some for your friends, or your friends want to purchase this video, call
1-800-201-7892. Extension 58, and it's available. Just talk to the operators. They take MasterCard, Visa, and personal checks.
And I will also make these available through my flyer and catalog and so forth. So we'll two-time them, Chip.
You bet. Get it out around the world.
That's right. Okay, listen. Congratulations, Chip. It's always a pleasure talking to you. We'll have another 26-hour interview on my radio show in the future.
Okay.
Every time I talk to this man, he comes out with some new information. But thanks for appearing on the
Thanks, Ted.
on the mic and in front of the video. And God bless you. You're a great American. And I'm real proud to say that I know you and have really worked with you indirectly.
Thanks. Let me say one last thing. Marine Recon all the way, boys.
Yes. Thank you, Marine Recon. See you later, folks.